And good evening, everyone. I'm Jerry Westby, and on behalf of the Conejo Open Space Foundation, I want to welcome you to tonight's talk. It's our third and last in our 2020 speaker series, and our second virtual presentation. Tonight, we're privileged and honored to welcome Dr. Marti Wiitter for what should prove to be a very interesting and timely talk. Now, some of you who may have signed up, having seen our ad in the Acorn and on social media, may not be familiar with us. So very briefly, the foundation, or COSF as we're commonly known, is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization. We have two main missions. We're dedicated to both educating the public on our open space and raising funds through donations to support the using, maintaining, and sustaining the open space, particularly the 150 miles of trails we are blessed to have here in the Conejo Valley. I want to take just a second and thank many of you who have made donations when you registered for tonight's talk. It's much appreciated. Besides the speaker series, your gift is going to help fund and support things like our $10,000 pledge to the National Wildlife Foundation's Liberty Canyon Wildlife Corridor Bridge. We've just announced in the last 2 weeks a scholarship program this coming spring to graduating seniors from county high schools who have decided to pursue an environmental science related major will be awarded $1,000. And that will continue through their next 3 years of their undergraduate education if they maintain that major and are full-time students and maintain the grade point average. We'd like to increase that in coming years. And your donations will also help us fund programs with COSCA. We recently helped to support the removal of invasive plants, for instance. So just want to let you know the donations will be well spent. So tonight, again, we have the privilege of hearing from Marti Wiitter about wildfires in the Santa Monica Mountains, how plants and wildlife recover from wildfires, and how climate change has impacted the prevention strategies, fire prevention strategies in California and more specifically here. Marti is a 35-year resident of the Santa Monica Mountains, and she's been a fire ecologist with the National Park Service's Santa Monica Mountains Division since 2001. And her job is to share the latest fire science about Southern California shrublands to guide the fire management practices in our park, to preserve the national park's unique natural resources, and to reduce fire hazards in our local communities. And as you probably guessed, that wasn't off the top of my head. That was a paragraph that she sent me. Marti received her Bachelor of Science in Biology from UC Irvine, a Master's in Forestry from Virginia Polytech Institute, and a PhD from the University of Hawaii. So she's traversed this great country and has picked up a lot of knowledge of different parts of the US. Now, in conclusion, I just want to mention a few words about the webinar format tonight. Besides Marti and myself, Steve Johnson, who is a COSF board member, will also be on hand to help if we run into any technical difficulties. And one thing I want to mention is there seems to be some kind of a glitch in Marti's microphone, and occasionally it sounds as if she's a robot in the bottom of an elevator. So if that happens, Steve or I will alert her, and it's just a matter of clicking to adjust the settings. So it won't take long. All attendees will be muted for obvious reasons. And the presentation that Marti will give will be about 45 minutes to maybe an hour. There will be a Q&A session afterwards for 15 to 20 minutes. We'd welcome your questions to be submitted at any time during the presentation. There's the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. And Steve and I will be selecting questions for Marti to address at the end. We may not get to them all, but we'll do our best. And lastly, we'll be recording the event. So if anyone has to cut out early, it will be on our website next week. So that's the introductory comments. Again, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. Without further ado, let's get on with the program. So Marti, take it away.
Okay, thanks so much, Jerry. And thank you all who are coming. I can't see you, but I guess you're out there in the internet world. So Jerry asked me to talk about fire history, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how fire has burned in the Santa Monica Mountains, the effects of climate change, and then also talk a lot about wildfire recovery after the Springs and the Woolsey fire. I don't really need to say much about this. The reason that Santa Monica Mountains was established was because of this very unique Mediterranean ecosystem that has incredibly high biodiversity and is a rich source of pleasure to all of us. So, starting with fire history, why do we worry about fire history? It really tells us the spatial distribution of fires and helps us understand how fires may threaten our communities and our natural resources. So I like to use this decadal view of the fires that have occurred here because it lets you see clearly just how much burns and where it burns. So some decades are very active, but others are quiet, like the 1960s. But in 1961, we had the Bel Air fire, which was the first widely recognized wild and urban interface fire, sort of in our modern history, with huge numbers of losses in the Los Angeles suburbs. There are no decades without large fires. On average, probably about a third of the area burns per decade. And usually, if you look at this pattern, you can see that there's not much overlap between fires within the 10 years of the decade. And here are our most recent fires, the Springs fire and the Woolsey fire, which are our current decade. And I'll be talking a little bit more about how they differ from previous fires we had. This is a really important map. If you take all of those fires that have occurred in our fire history and overlay them on one another, what you see are the areas that have reburned in the 95 years of our fire history. So the cool colors are where we had 1, 2, or 3 fires, and the hot colors are where we're starting to get 7, 8, 9, and 10 fires, and very short fire return intervals between the fires. Now, if you think of chaparral as a vegetation type that is adapted to a natural fire return interval of 75 to 150 years, you have to realize that short fire return intervals between fires is not good for it. So when we look at those histories, what it does is it lets us characterize our fires, and it lets us understand what the characteristics are and how we manage for them. So when you look at that fire history, here's what we have. We have large, wind-driven, high-intensity crown fires. Most of the biomass gets consumed. They have a very rapid rate of spread because they're wind-driven. They usually occur in the fall between September and December. Virtually all of our ignition sources are human, which means if you can control the ignitions, you can control the number of fires. As you saw from the map, we have an unnaturally high fire return interval. We have an extensive wild and urban interface, an intermix, and we certainly have a history of major disasters of homes and lives lost. So, how do our recent fires differ? The Springs fire was unusual in that it occurred in the spring, and which was basically unprecedented. Normally, it's not possible for that to occur. We do have Santa Ana winds in the spring, but normally there's too much moisture in the vegetation to carry a fire. But the Springs fire occurred at the beginning of a 6-year drought. And so when we had an ignition and extremely high winds in May, that fire grew to, I think, 27,000 acres. And this shows just how unusual it was. That red bar is the area that was burned in May, which is completely unknown for the rest of the fire history. During the years 2012 to 2018, we had a record drought. Paleoclimatologists estimated that it was a 1,200-year record. One of the things that occurred as a result is there was extensive dieback in the mountains, and you can see the dead chaparral shrubs in this photo. So that means not only did the Springs fires start with a drought, the Springs fire was followed by another 5 years of drought after it had burned. The Woolsey fire, what was unique about that? It's the largest fire on record. It's 2.5 times the size of the next largest fire, which was the Green Meadow Fire in 1993. It burned a record number of structures, 1,600. It had an extreme rate of spread, and that was possibly due to dieback, the type that we saw in the picture before. And one of the really fortunate occurrences is that that fire was followed by an extremely excellent rain year. So this is a table that CAL FIRE puts out regularly. They document the 20 largest fires in California and the 20 largest destructive fires in California. And so I wanted to just put our fires in perspective for the state. So in 2017, the Thomas Fire had the unfortunate I've lost my word. It became the largest fire on record in California. Of course, that was followed the next year by the Mendocino Complex, which became the next largest, which took that title. And in 2020, we now have 5 fires that it's 5 fires in the top 5 fires. So clearly something is happening. So what happened in 2020? It wasn't just climate change. We've had more than 4 million acres burn in California, and this surpasses any previous year by 3-fold. And what were the contributing factors? So it was a low rainfall year in the north. We had a long and intense heat wave, and we had an extraordinary lightning storm, which occurred throughout the north and caused multiple ignitions. And this kind of event is not unknown, but occurs sort of at the scale of decades. Fire suppression in woodlands had increased the biomass. And again, that long drought from 2012 to 2017 had caused vegetation dieback. So not only are these fires really large, but they are becoming increasingly destructive. And again, what is the reason for that? So the Woolsey fire, we know that it was preceded by 5 years of drought. It had a lot of dead vegetation that spurred its spread. The Camp Fire was burning up in Paradise at exactly the same time. So a lot of fire resources had been pulled to the north of the state and were not available to fight the fires down in Southern California. So all of these things combined. The Thomas Fire, one of the reasons for that fire was that it was driven by a completely unique Santa Ana event. So while it occurred under the normal conditions for a fall fire, that Santa Ana event was 9 to 10 days long, which is double or triple what any normal Santa Ana event went. So it was just, it was, the period that it was burning was just extended abnormally long. And then finally, the Tubbs fire, where there were over 5,000 homes lost, 22 fatalities. That fire burned in exactly the same footprint as the 1964 Hanley fire. So this is a known wind corridor up in Northern California. But if you look at the difference in population, you can see that between the time of the Hanley fire and the Tubbs fire, that there had been almost exponential growth in the population. And if you look at the development pattern, there was substantial development into that fire corridor, and a lot of that fire was an urban fire. Once it got into the developed areas, it spread structure to structure. So why don't we just get rid of all this stuff? It's like the stuff burns up, it's dangerous. Why don't we just get rid of it? It's because it's valuable to us. It provides all kinds of ecosystem services. It fixes carbon, supports biodiversity, supports habitat. It's really important in holding up our slopes and reducing erosion and stream sedimentation. And plus it serves just a lot of social benefits as well. And when it burns, we actually recognize why we value it, because when it's gone, there are an infinite number of problems that follow as those slopes that were being held up start to run down into the streams and roads and homes below them. So I want to talk a little bit about post-fire recovery now. So once it's gone, what affects recovery? First is that all fires aren't exactly the same. Even though large areas burn, they burn in complex patterns, and there may often be these unburned inclusions, so they're little islands of unburned vegetation. And while these are not important for vegetation recovery, which is coming up from existing seeds and burls existing on the site, it's very important for smaller species of wildlife as a source for wildlife colonization or refuge from the fire. Another thing that's different between the fires, and it was dramatically different between the Springs fire and the Woolsey fire, is just how intense those fires burned. So when you look across a burned chaparral landscape, what you usually see is a lot of burned vegetation, but lots and lots of skeletons. So not everything is completely consumed. Ooh, what did I do? Sorry. Wrong button. So look at the contrast between what was left after the Springs fire and what's left after the Woolsey fire. I've never seen a landscape where the vegetation was so completely consumed as in the Woolsey fire. And we attribute a lot of this to the amount of standing dead vegetation that was in a lot of the landscape that probably was completely consumed by the fire. So the most dramatic and unique aspect of chaparral fires is the profusion of wildfire flowers in the first and second year after fire. There are hundreds of annuals, bulbs, and herbaceous perennials that become more abundant after fire because of added nutrients, sun, and lack of competition. So when we look at a burned chaparral landscape, why don't we think it's been destroyed? And this is from the botanist's viewpoint. Chaparral is really a classic example of a fire-adapted plant community because of what we call the autosuccessional regeneration that occurs afterwards. And by autosuccessional, we mean what was there before the fire comes back after the fire. And the reason it does that is because everything has been consumed above ground. And so if you're going to recover from the fire, you either have to have a seed in the soil seed bank, or you have to have an underground plant part that's capable of resprouting. So those are the two ways that you can come back after the fire. And unlike forests, there's very little colonization, at least initially, of things that are coming in from outside the burn area to promote vegetation recovery. And this is just a time series after the 1993 Green Meadow Fire. Upper left, in February 1993, you can see intact chaparral. You see it in November after the fire. All of the vegetation's consumed. Then you see it that following spring after rains. And this is one herbaceous perennial species that is a specialized fire faller. It's Dicentra. And then finally, 13 years after the fire, you see that the vegetation has come back very, very similar to what was there before. You can even pick out individual plants that have grown up in the intervening period of time. So now let me talk a little bit about recovery in the springs and the Woolsey fire. The Springs fire burnt. So what you're seeing here is a Google Earth satellite image of the Springs fire. It's from August of 2019, and that fire was in May of 2013. But you can still pick out the fire scar in the landscape from the aerial image, and that's because it just really hasn't recovered in that intervening time. So normally we would expect chaparral on the coast to have close to a closed canopy by 10 years after fire. And that is not what we are seeing here in the Springs fire. So our question is whether recovery is just slow as a result of the drought, or whether we're going to see a permanent change in the type of vegetation that was there. So what about the wildfire response, the wildlife response after the Springs fire? We know from other studies that in general, small birds, small animals, and reptiles sort of follow their preferred habitat structure after fire. Species that prefer open habitat increase after the fire. Species that prefer mature closed canopy chaparral or scrub decline, and that as the vegetation recovers over time, those closed canopy species start to come in and the open preference species disappear. So this is data from a study that was done after the Cedar Fire in San Diego. Now, so this is the fun part for you. We really weren't organized and prepared to do large-scale monitoring of wildlife after the fire. It sort of took us all by surprise. But Justin Brown, one of our wildlife biologists and park volunteers, were able to install and monitor wildfire cameras at 90 sites and record wildlife use from August of 2013 to March 2015. So I'm going to let you just sit back and enjoy some clips that you can see sort of how the habitat is recovering, and also how it's being used for a lot of animal shenanigans. So I'm sure that most everyone knows that one of the major impacts of fire, following fire, is the flooding and debris flows that occur after storms in the first couple of winters after fire. This has a huge impact on stream habitat for aquatic amphibians like frogs and salamanders, even under normal circumstances. But during a drought, what we see is sediment being deposited and then not being removed by subsequent storms. In Sycamore Canyon, we saw a years-long loss of pool habitat for amphibian reproduction. These are really just an amazingly striking series of photos, I think. So, moving on to the Woolsey fire recovery. Again, the most important, I can't emphasize this enough, but if you have almost 100,000 acre fire and you have a good rainfall year, you have totally won the lottery in vegetation recovery. So again, we have this spectacular spring and summer of native herbs. Because fire is so important to determining our vegetation structure and condition, our long-term vegetation monitoring program changes our protocol from its regular program of 100 plots per year to include all plots located in the burn area and to measure them for the first 2 years after fire. So the filled circles on this map were already established plots prior to the 2019 field season, so it gave us pre-fire data, and the open circles were established in 2019. This created an unbelievable workload for our vegetation crew, who normally measures 100 plots, which is a lot of work. And in this year, they measured 209 plots, 164 that were burned, and 45 unburned plots. So this is what one of our plots looks like. So this is data, a photo taken before the fire, and we have data before the fire. And this is what it looked like immediately after the fire. This is what it looked like in the spring when we actually did our post-fire measurements. And again, another photo just to show how the vegetation had changed by the end of the year, with a lot of dieback of those annuals. So we have just a tiny slice of the data that has been collected in this project. And the two really important points, one which is surprising, is that if you compare the species richness, which is just the number of different species that you see in a specific per unit of area, that in both the burned and the unburned plots, it's roughly the same number. That's sort of totally counter to all of our fire ecological wisdom, which says that the highest species diversity occurs in burned settings. So that was a surprise to us. It also documents the effect of the drought on post-fire recruitment after the Springs fire compared to after the Woolsey fire. So in 2014, when they measured the number of seedlings and resprouts that survived after the fire, it was 4 to 3 with a maximum of 20 after Springs with the drought. And after Woolsey, in a good rainfall year, we had 8 to 3 in a meter squared with a maximum of 95. So that sort of confirms our idea that things did not go well after the Springs fire, and that so far things seem to be doing well in the Woolsey area. The vegetation crew also documented a large number of new rare plant populations. These were just some of what they saw. This is Blockman's live forever, or Dudleya blockmanii. This beautiful plant is Plummer's Mariposa lily and Calochortus plummeri, which was, I think, abundant in some areas. But the real star of our T&E species was finding multiple populations of Bronton's milkvetch, which is normally only known from a few locations, and the populations are in the tens or hundreds. At this site, they found thousands of individuals. So this was startling and wonderful. So now I want to talk about the effects on wildlife. Now, as a plant biologist, you look at this and you go, okay, it's going to come back, it's okay. But if you're a wildlife biologist, I imagine looking at this is pretty bleak. If you're an animal, how do you feel about the change from the habitat that you see on the left to what's there on the right? So in terms of just how wildfire can deal with directly with the wildfire effects, there's only a limited number of strategies. You can flee and recolonize, which is the strategy that most large animals and birds use. So you actually leave the fire area to an unburned area. Or there are refugia. So you can happen to be in unburned vegetation islands, riparian streams that may not burn, aquatic habitat, rock slopes or caves, or underground burrows. And these are the kinds of things that we think of small mammals and reptiles doing. And then there's a small subset of some insects also undergo sort of a dormancy. So, do animals die? Yes, some more than others. And since I'm a botanist, I am sparing you the dead animal pictures, which our wildlife biologists can definitely show you. So the larger animals mostly escape, but not all. We have a record of a mountain lion dying, and we're presuming that it was from burned feet by re-entering the burn area. Birds mostly escape, but they did find some dead birds. So those are probably ground-dwelling birds like doves or roadrunners, or birds that specialize in closed canopy. They found lots of dead rabbits. I think some dead gophers and squirrels, but I would expect some of those to do okay from their underground burrows. Reptiles, rattlesnakes are commonly found dead. And then finally, there's the wood rat that lives in above ground nests of little tiny sticks that I have no idea how he survives in a chaparral fire regime. So I would assume he has about 100% mortality. So the park has a number of long-term wildlife monitoring projects that have pre-fire data, and they're collecting post-fire data. This is the data for one bobcat, a male, and on the left you can see his home range before the fire, and then after the fire he's expanded out. He's expanded into this area that it's an unburned area that he wasn't in before. This little tiny unburned area. They do use some of the perimeter around urban areas, And then it seems also moves into the fire somewhat. But mostly they seem to be avoiding the burned area, but still not moving completely into suburban areas. And this is a slightly different picture. This is a female that before the fire, they just had one camera trap location, and then this is her use after the fire. And she actually seems to be sticking a lot to sort of at the urban edge where there's some wild green space, but she seems to be much more tolerant of that urban interface area. And then the surprise with this was that in the spring, she settled in one location, and this is what they found, is that she'd had a litter of 4 kittens, and she was the first female recorded to den in a residential area. So collaring and tracking mountain lions is part of the park's longest running study. This is P64. They called him the culvert cat because he had found a way to cross the freeway and had made 7 freeway crossings in his first month in the mountains. Unfortunately, after the fire, he moved through the burn area, and then as time passed, he had stopped moving, and our park biologists went to find him, and they found that he had died and had badly burned paws. So they assumed that he died as a result of that injury. So prior to the fire, there were 5 mountain lions that were being tracked in the vicinity of the fire and that survived the fire. P30 is the male that ranges through most of the mountains. He has the little orange squares, and he basically goes from the west end to the east end of the mountains. The remaining 4 lions are females. As you can see, they have smaller and much more localized home ranges. So after the fire, the lions mostly moved out of the burn area. The one exception was P65, a female, and she roamed somewhat along the coast, but she really focused on this one area that had not burned in the fire. This is a little unburned area. So she spent her time in that unburned area. As time went on, in the second month after the fire, these patterns sort of became more condensed. So P56, who was at the, that isn't P56. Oh, it was at the west end, sort of was clustered more tightly on the western end. And anyway, their home ranges just became a little tighter and more compact. But after 5 to 6 months post-fire, they've really started to expand again and spread out. They're starting to use some of the burn habitat, but still not as much as in the unburned area. And the male lion has crossed the burn area, and he has now returned to the eastern part of the mountains around Topanga, where he had been prior to the fire. Another park project is doing stream surveys to monitor breeding amphibians, and also a project to reintroduce the California red-legged frog, which had been extinct except for one population in the Simi Hills. Oops, wrong way. So this is a map of the source population and then all of the reintroduction sites of the red-legged frog. And in 2018, they had just found, or possibly even 2017, they found that the reestablished populations had actually reproduced and were being safely reestablished. So after the fire, there was a living frog. But while the frogs survived, their habitat, their breeding habitat, did not. So just like in springs, these pools filled up. This is another site, pools filled up. Same site looking downstream. But unlike the Springs fire, with subsequent storms to the sediment being deposited, they'd already started scouring out again. And so habitat was, with continued rainfall, these habitats will be scoured out and will reestablish. So these were the conclusions that our wildlife biologists came to. There's definitely mortality, especially in the smaller animals, and we really don't know a lot about them. We do have the ongoing reptile and amphibian monitoring, so we are collecting data on that. The bobcat and mountain lion monitoring data is going to be incredibly useful because we'll really be able to track how the animals become reestablished and reuse their habitat as it recovers. So having both the degree of vegetation recovery and the use patterns by the lions is really unique. And again, as you saw, the aquatic habitat is really most affected by debris flows. And if you continue to get rain, they'll recover, but drought complicates the picture. So the park is definitely hoping to have the red-legged frog project continue. So what are our fire and climate threats? So how our fire regime changes is incredibly important to how vegetation recovers or how animals survive the fire or recolonize it. So plants are incredibly sensitive to frequency, how often fires reoccur, but animals much less so. Plants are completely independent of the size or patchiness of the fire, but these have really significant impacts on the animals that either shelter in refugia or flee and recolonize. The rate of spread, obviously a fast-moving fire, is likely to increase mortality in animals that either shelter or flee. Similarly, the higher the intensity of the fire, the more likely you are to have mortality, especially in refugia. And finally, all of plants and wildlife are all affected by fires that occur in atypical seasons. Our threat of most concern in the Santa Monica Mountains is short fire return intervals between fires. And these have just a myriad effects. One of the first studies that we did here in the mountains was to look at the effect of short return intervals on species, the obligate cedar species, the one that just come back from seeds in the soil bank after fire. If there's not enough time between fires, the plants cannot get big enough and reproduce a large enough seed bank to recover if a fire comes through too soon before the seed bank is rebuilt. And so researchers from Pepperdine looked for areas where a single population of a population of an obligate cedar, big pod ceanothus, had experienced a short fire return interval and an area right next to it that had a longer fire interval. So this was the boundary between that repeat fire. And basically what you find is that at 3 years, if fires reoccur after a burn, that 100% of that species is lost. And at 6 years, you still have a more than 85% decrease in the relative density of that species. So basically, short fire return intervals lead to extirpation of those species. And one example is big pod ceanothus, and there are other ceanothus species as well. So this shows the loss of long-lived chaparral shrubs at a site that experienced 3 fires in 11 years. To the left is typical chaparral with a diversity of different shrub species. And the middle image shows what the area looked like in the first year after fire of the 3rd fire. So all that you see are resprouting laurel sumacs and non-native annual grasses. And finally, 10 years after the last fire, all that is left is a single, or actually it's probably 2 species of chaparral of successful resprouting, strong resprouters like laurel sumac. I think this is Rus ovata. And then a real lack. So we don't have a closed canopy ecosystem anymore. We don't have species diversity anymore. Another effect is the loss of those wonderful post-fire annuals. These red dots are modern grassland plots in Cheeseboro Canyon. The underlying map base layer shows the vegetation type that existed in 1934. And so plots that had previously been coastal sage, when you measure them, they do not have any of those post-fire herbs that you would expect in that vegetation type. So you've definitely seen a loss of that part of our flora in these type converted areas when you compare them to what comes up in coastal sage or chaparral after a fire. So type conversion, it's occurring, it's ongoing. It's occurring throughout Southern California. In the Santa Monica Mountains, when people compare the 1930s vegetation map to the current distribution of vegetation, they find that about 30% of the vegetation has been type converted to annual grasslands or degraded shrublands. And why do we care? So there's just a whole suite of basically it degrades the quality of the habitat in a whole number of ways. And also, if you're concerned about fire, those flashy annual fuels certainly increase fire hazard. How will climate change affect fire? The most important thing to remember is that it's different among the climate regions of California. You cannot lump the whole state together and assume that you know what's happening. So each of these points represents a single fire, or the amount of area burned in a year and the average temperature for the 4 seasons, winter, spring, summer, and autumn in the Sierra Nevada. And then the same thing, the 4 seasons in the south coast of Southern California. And basically what it shows is that increases in temperature in any season in Southern California has no relationship whatsoever to the amount of area burned. This is in contrast to the Sierra Nevada, where in fact you do see a temperature signal. As it gets warmer in the Sierras, in the spring and summer temperatures, you do see an increase in the amount of area burned, and spring precipitation also contributes to that relationship. So a lack of spring precipitation also increases the amount of area burned. So I think the most important thing to think about with climate change and fire is that there are lots of other things that contribute to the fires that we're seeing. Climate change may give us more days when conditions promote wildfire, but each fire is driven by the same factors as always: ignitions, weather, fuel, and topography. So we need to look at all of the factors that are going into creating this fire situation if we really want to solve that problem. Increasing temperature does have the effect of increasing what's called climate change drought. So as temperatures go up, vegetation's more stressed and drier, and so it is more susceptible to, it is more flammable and susceptible to burning. We have drought and fire. We have numerous interactions going on here. We're just starting to understand them. Drought following fires, it causes mortality in shrubs, and which is something that people really hadn't thought about a lot. So that most people had assumed that resprouting shrubs they resprouted and they were fine, but actually you definitely get a large increase in some species when you have drought following fire. And finally, we had really extensive drought dieback in coast live oak. We don't really know how that affected mortality after fires, but we were just recently out on a field trip, and we were surprised at the hardiness of coast live oaks to persist in the face of tremendous stressors. So these are trees that had been written off as dead after a fire in 2016, but there they were trying to grow in September of 2020. So it was an impressive surprise. So for preventive strategies, I've listed a lot of resources at the end of this. I'll let people find them because people have done a lot of work and a lot more than I can cover here. But when you think about why we lose homes and lives, it's we have really big, fast moving fires which create tremendous ember storms. And when there are homes in front of those fires, we lose the homes. And we really need to do better to protect our communities. We need to do more effective work at the landscape level. And most importantly, we really need to harden our homes and do all of our work from the house out. And this is just an approach suggested by a colleague of mine, John Keeley at the USGS, and that we don't need to be doing prescribed burning far out in the landscape. We need to be doing planning. We need to be preventing ignitions. We need to do the protection of our homes and landscapes. And we need real-time predictions that will let us know where these fires are going in real time when they start. So I want to thank all the people who contributed slides to this presentation, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Marty. That was terrific. We have a few questions that are coming in, but I have one question. You know, I had heard that there are some trees. Oh, looks like I've got my robotic audio problem.
Oh, you sound fine to me.
No, you just went.
Oh, I went robotic. Here we go. Better?
Better, and I'm better.
Great. Okay.
It's contagious.
I know.
So, Mike, I was about to ask, I had heard that some trees, like maybe oak trees, their seeds need super hot fires in order to germinate. And so that was part of the life cycle of those trees prior to the extensive development in this area. Are there plants that do benefit from that fire? You pointed out some of the wildflowers that spring up after fires, but
Yeah, so sorry, that part of that is what got cut from the too many slides that I had. So oaks are not one of the species that require fire. So oaks obviously make acorns. Acorns are killed by fire. So oaks recruit in long interfire years. So they recruit between fires. The species that you're talking about are the cedars, the obligate cedars we talked about, or the facultative cedars. So those are the ones that require the adult plant is killed, but it has seeds that are stored long term in the seed bank, and they require a fire cue to germinate. So in some of them, it's heat. And in some of them, it is chemicals that are in the smoke. So yes, so there are definitely a lot of specialized adaptations for seeds to germinate after fire. And so an example would be, ceanothus, big pod ceanothus, all of the ceanothus really germinate with heat cues.
all right, thanks. Here's a question that I think probably a lot of people have. It's a simple question. A lot of mustard grew after the Woolsey fire. Is there a way to get rid of mustard?
Mustard. So, yeah, yes. I mean, the problem with mustard is it's so widespread and so well established that I think usually plants that have become naturalized in that way, often the best way to deal with it is biological controls, an imported pest, because it's so widespread. But if you have an area that has particular ecological importance or personal importance that you want to restore, then you can go in and repeated mowing of mustard is pretty effective. And then you need to probably do active restoration. So you need to plant things that will outcompete the mustard once you've sort of knocked it back.
Thanks. Amy asked a question early on in your presentation. It's a rather long, so bear with me. How is the California Chaparral Institute affecting the brush clearance effort in the Conejo open space? The invasive species of black mustard and star thistle are choking out the native chaparral. Regeneratively managed goats and sheep can help chaparral recovery because they eat the invasives, first giving the natives the ability to recover more easily. So I guess the question is about the California Chaparral Institute.
Huh. I don't know if so I know the California Chaparral Institute well. I did not know if they were doing any work up here besides, they do a lot of educational outreach and provide educational programs. So the problem with goats is that the one place I've seen them work really successfully is in very, very old, overgrown chaparral because they will eat. They are really tough. So they can get in and actually eat out some of that understory and raise the canopy. And if it's high enough, they leave some of the green. So it really thins out the density of deadwood. But the problem with goats is they don't know what they're supposed to eat. And when I've seen them, they definitely prefer the coastal sage shrubs or the chaparral shrubs to the weeds. The weeds are sort of like not their favorite food. So it's so yeah. Goats take people who manage goat herds are incredibly talented and know their animals and can target things, but often it takes a lot of training and habituation. It's not as straightforward as you would hope.
I see. Well, Doug asked a question here. Are there any land management changes proposed in the SMMNRA, which I don't know what that is. Maybe you could.
That's the National Recreation Area, one of our
Oh, the Santa Monica
abbreviation.
National Recreation Area, yes. Are there any land management changes proposed in the SMMNRA based on the findings from the recent fires?
I think so. I think what's happening is after the 2017 fires, I asked our colleagues at LA County Fire if they'd sort of, as a result of it was such a shocking occurrence. It was like, well, have you guys changed what you're going to do or change your outreach? And it was sort of like, no. But then there's 2018, 2019, and 2020. And in 2020, there is very, very, very serious work being done at all levels of community groups, to state government, to natural resource agencies, to really come together and try to develop effective strategies for reducing the losses in these fires. So I would say that we aren't really changing our plan, but we've applied for grants. So at the bottom of this presentation, there's a link to a new website that the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains just completed with a grant that we helped them write. So that's something for homeowners to look at their own property and give them the information they need to do. And there's another grant that's also being managed by the RCD that is really looking to make on-the-ground changes. So home hardening projects, defensible space projects, and I think there's a lot of effort going to work in that 100-foot home ignition zone to really make improvements and help homeowners make changes.
Thanks. Excuse me. So here's a question that I think many of us might have had one time or another, and I'll rephrase it a little bit. Max asked this: when after there's been a fire, what are the best things we could do to restore a type converted area like the Simi Hills, other than preventing fires?
Well, if it's type converted, it's less important to prevent fires because you're not going to type convert anything more. Just do restoration plantings. So control the weeds, plant natives. Of the projects that I just talked about, there are several where there are large-scale oak plantings proposed, and I think the Simi Hills is definitely one of the areas because oaks, I think, act as ember breaks. Sort of, they break up the wind flow and hopefully reduce the ember density reaching communities, as well as obviously improving habitat. So that's one project. And we do have Joey Algiers at the park is our restoration ecologist, and he has a wealth of knowledge, and he'd always be welcome to help anyone with their ideas.
Joey was scheduled to give a speaker event talk last spring, but
Oh,
the pandemic hit, just a few weeks before. So we,
yeah,
canceled everything and
yeah.
tried to wait things
Well,
out.
try and get him sometime in the future. He's great.
Yeah. Here's a question from Leslie. If another large-scale, high-severity fire passes through the Santa Monica Mountains in the next 10 years, would we see irreversible type conversion given the fires that we've had in the last 5 years or so?
There are definitely areas.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the Springs fire isn't even 10 years old, although it's recovering so poorly. Actually, because it's recovering so poorly, another fire through there could be devastating. Yes, there are lots of, you just have to look at those fire maps and it'll tell you where you want to keep fire out of. Topanga is sort of the last area that has vegetation that to burn. And I'm living here in the middle of all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it looks like our final question here is from Amy, and I'll rephrase this also a little bit. Can you talk about goats and whether they leave the chaparral and sagebrush alone and help natives to prosper, or do they eat everything?
They eat everything. Yeah. So you just have to, you need to have very clear ideas of what your goals are, and whether the eating habits of the goat is really going to match going to let you reach your objectives.
Terrific. Well, we have one more just comment, Marty, to thank you. Glad you mentioned www.defensiblespace.org as a super resource for homeowners. So that was much appreciated. And
great.
Here's another question. Is there a reason we can't have a large system? I'm sorry. Is there a reason we can't have large system fire breaks to make spaces more defensible?
There's just a lot of work that shows. So again, think about these fires. So the Woolsey fire jumped the 101 freeway. How are you going to build a fuel break that stops these fires? So fuel breaks are really more effective in places where you're setting backfires, or you have people who can go out and do active control. The Santa Monica Mountains are really pretty small, and so our fires come through and they've burned to the coast in 4 hours, 6 hours. The fires just blow right past a fuel break. You need to be sure that we focus on defensible space for that reason, because that's the target of value that you don't want to burn. So you want to prevent any kind of ignition starting in that 100 feet around your home or landscape. So that's what you want to prevent, because if you can stop the ignitions and reduce the frequency that way, that's a very important strategy that hasn't been given a lot of serious thought, except with electrical lines starting fires, the power companies are now taking it very seriously.
They are.
Yeah. So house out is our watchword.
Well, thank you again. It looks like that is the end of the questions. And I want to thank all of the attendees for staying. I hope everyone has learned some things and enjoyed taking advantage of Marty's expertise. Marty, any concluding comments, thoughts?
If you like, I can give you a PDF copy of this presentation if you want to post that, because then people can access the resources, and if there's any information that was in the
That's a great idea.
program, we're welcome to share that information. Then you don't have to go through and watch the presentation. So I can send that to you.
Thank you.
There are 4 very good websites referenced at the end that if anyone's looking for information, there's great information there.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Marty. Yes, and if you could send us the PowerPoint slides, we can post those, and then we'll also
Sure.
have the recording
Okay.
next week. So thank you again. I know you're off to Hawaii to see your mother
Eventually.
week, so we will all end this with a note of jealousy.
Okay.
All right.
It was very
Thank you.
fun. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye.
Join us next time.